So I was gonna write about this, but I want to talk about it on the record now, just because I really feel like a lot of conversations are being conflated, and I think it's a pretty pivotal moment, like in this country with an election coming up, for people to really understand. Um, I don't know, maybe like what I'm seeing, at least in this really awkward space, right? Being in the Bay Area, having like grown up here, being in tech, having the experiences that I have, and thinking about where I want to go in terms of like my research, my politics, my career, my life. Um, there's a lot of things I think a lot of people aren't like piecing together, so I just wanted to break a couple of those down here, just because I kind of feel like my purview hasn't been heard. Um, so here's one thing, like the Black Panther Party did like start in the Bay Area, and Angela Davis has been trending. She's been talking, been really, active about around that, and she's very far left, right? She's definitely like pro like socialist. She's very socialist, like the People's Party, power to the people, very feminist. So those are her politics, and I like understand that. I'm not saying I agree. I'm saying like I understand that, but when you actually think about the significance and the impact of the Black Panther Party as a whole, there was a lot of misogyny there, but they also fed a lot of people. So one thing I see happening with like the People's Breakfast Oakland with Blake and Delancey and the Hella Black podcast, like they're feeding people. Like so, despite what you believe politically, feeding poor people is a positive thing, and feeding poor Black people is a positive thing too. So if you're like about like Juneteenth or equity or any of that, that shouldn't be difficult to understand. And it's interesting because in cities like Oakland, Chicago, the Bronx, like New York, right? There's like clusters of inner city youth, and like inner city urban youth is just like this really like messed up system where people don't get out. It's like people who are born in the projects, and just all the things, the like broken families, the drugs, the like street culture, the school to prison pipeline, the illiteracy rates. It's all horrible. I mean, there's not enough instructors, right, to actually teach this like whole person learning that's required for mastery and understanding. And then there's no support at home because if you're talking about like low income parents, that means those parents probably don't have a university education, which probably means that they don't really have an in-depth knowledge of the world. Like I think Asada Shakur is like one specific example. Like I don't think she went to school, but she was like a community activist and was pretty like aware and well read, and had a pretty good understanding of the world. And even then, with all of that, she still died in poverty, which was something that, like, if you even think about Tupac, like having to grow up and expressing all of these like really like awful kind of like experiences around that. And um these things aren't changing. And it's very interesting to just see so many more people want to like join the conversation and kind of like eat off the plate. Like, oh man, like the civil rights movement was like a really really big deal. Like slavery and segregation and Jim Crow, that stuff is like so fucking real. Like it really impacts like the way that people are living their lives now. Like I really deeply like there's like I grew up with a racist grandmother. Like I have racist family members. Like even some of the stuff like my interactions with my mother, like she has her own like racist baggage. Like it's very real, and like it impacts us like today, like as adults. It's maddening. Like it didn't end, and I do not feel like I'm a person who has a lot of privilege, but I do know there are people who have even less access than me. Like they didn't go to like good public schools. Like they never had an opportunity to go to university, any university. They've never had any internships or like mentors. They don't understand comprehension. Like they might literally have like a third grade reading level, and like what the hell, like what can you do with that? You literally can't do anything with that. You don't know how the world works. Like you constantly feel like there's no justice. You don't have therapy, no healthcare. Like what, like really, what are you living for? That is such an incomplete life. It's an incomplete life, but it's like this is what Black America is right now, right? And I just, it's so sad because there's this like idea of like the talented 10th. Like you're not the talented anything when you have fucking like Kumon in private school. You are literally just wealthy. That's it. You're just wealthy and you have people paying for you to like be well. It's the same thing as like celebrities having like personal trainers and like organic food. They're like buying the access, you know. It's not that they're like inherently better. You know, like the only case I might make there is like Beyonce, right? Like she, I think the way that she grew up might have been, you know, pretty like middle class, but like she was gonna work harder than anybody else, like to be like a great singer and to make herself better and get to the next level, right? Or there's other people like Will Smith. You know, other people have this sort of like stance in life where, you know, like no matter where they start, they're just gonna work hard and they're gonna like make it happen. I feel like I'm kind of gritty like that too, but it's just unrealistic to expect like the entire Black community to be able to be like as gritty as these like really few instances of people making it. Most of the people that you're in, if you're like, oh, but I have Black colleagues, so that means that it's possible. Like there's a real sort of like body switching thing that I'm seeing also, and I never see people talk about this, but like virtually all of the really Black people in academia and university, those are all Africans. Like they are coming literally from Africa, and when schools are trying to get their like affirmative action quotas and their like Black student numbers up, those are not Black Americans, those are Africans. And I'm sorry, but that like those aren't their spots, right? Like they were not. I personally, I can't agree with that narrative. Like even no matter like how hard you worked, there are universities like where you are, right? Like you can go to those schools, and so many like Black Americans worked really hard. They like voted and protested, right? Like they were bitten by dogs and sprayed by hoses. Like I do not really agree with this like non-violent Martin Luther King way of like, you know, moving through protest, but there were a lot of Black people who did follow that narrative and who like really fought to get civil rights passed and to get access and to integrate schools and to try to gain opportunity. And there are only a few people who were able to like gain opportunity from all of that progress. Everyone else got trapped in the ghetto. They were like hit hard by like the crack epidemic and the like that stuff is like so real. Like people progress was like wiped out. And I think when I hear people like Kanye West or like Candace Owens like really talking about their own upbringing, coming from like sort of like nothing to like, you know, making something of themselves, and how tragic it is really in the Black community, that is the part of the narrative that for some reason I haven't heard anyone else actually talk about. Like when I keep hearing these like Black tech people or even like white tech people talking about like making progress or doing something more, it's strange to me because like I don't really feel like they understand how bad it is. Like the violence, the crime, the poverty, these are like real heavy social issues, the housing, the like domestic abuse, the food deserts, the I mean, these kids need like Kumon and therapy. That's what they need, like reading and math Kumon, and like every single Black American kid needs like a personal therapist. Like that would be and they need like stable housing outside of the ghetto. Like you can't have just everybody living in a project. I think it's not a project. Like the social experiment worked. Everybody fails. Like, all right. But the other thing I wanted to share on this call or this talk, whatever, this little rant. So I saw Arne Duncan talking this week, and when I did my AmeriCorps year, it just changed my life. Like it was just something so strange about realizing how awful public schools now, specifically like underfunded public schools for like Black kids in this country, it's so awful. Like it's no surprise that like these students aren't making it to university and they're not researchers or fucking computer scientists. Are you kidding? These kids literally cannot read. Like they can't read. I just wanted to read you guys like the first chapter of this book and highly encourage you to get it. So it's called How Schools Work by Arne Duncan. The first chapter, it's called Lies, Lies Everywhere. All right, so education runs on lies. That's probably not what you'd expect from a former Secretary of Education, but it's the truth. Lies are as emblematic of our educational system as an apple left on the corner of a favorite teacher's desk. Damn, Arnie. But unlike the apple, the lies aren't sweet. They are overripe and rotten. I've been aware of education's lies since childhood. I saw them every day at an after-school program my mom, Sue Duncan, ran on Chicago's South Side. But growing up, I never fully appreciated how insidious they were. That began to change in 1986 when I got to know someone named Calvin Williams. So this is like a Black kid. That fall, I set out to begin my senior year at Harvard, where I studied sociology and co-captained the Crimson basketball team. Like so many young people who have found the good fortune to get an elite college education, I was trying to figure out what to do with my life. I got into Harvard through elbow grease and athletic skill, and the only reason I could afford it was because my dad's employer, the University of Chicago, paid most of my tuition. Well, talk about privilege, right? A lot of my friends tilted toward law or investment banking. I believed I could put in the work and do fine in either of those fields, but the more I considered them, the more unconvinced I became. Yeah, seems like he's like ethical. Got some morality issues going on. Two things kept tripping me up. The first was that I was a decent basketball player. Even though my Harvard team wasn't that good, yeah, they never are. We won 9 games against 17 losses in my final season, and I hoped to play professionally. If not in the NBA, then perhaps overseas. I knew basketball couldn't last forever and that someday I'd need to make use of the opportunities granted by my Harvard education, but I also knew that I could hustle, had a pretty smooth jump shot, and could always keep guys honest on defense. I was young and I needed to at least try to play ball professionally, didn't I? The second thing tripping me up was the Sue Duncan Children's Center. For more than 25 years, my mom had been helping kids in the North Kenwood neighborhood with their educations. From 3 in the afternoon to 8 at night, she worked up to make up for what the local schools couldn't or wouldn't teach between 8 and 3. I helped her at the center while taking a year off after my junior year, working in her program and doing field work for my senior sociology thesis. Aside from doing research, I also hoped to figure out if this work was something I wanted to do full-time later in life. Interesting. By the summer of 86, I knew I would try to play pro ball. But the question was, what would I do afterwards? I didn't know. So I spent most of that year working with older kids in the program, 16 and 17 years old, who were preparing for the ACT, or with kids who wanted to finish high school strong so they could have a shot at a decent paying job. It was a hard time in life for these kids, many of whom would sit around and talk about whether or not it was possible for them to live past 30. That is so fucking real. These kids are literally like going to jail or like getting shot up in the neighborhood. Nobody's living past 30. Like, what if everybody you know died by 30? That's a real thing. Like, it's a real thing. There's a lot of people from my high school, I don't know, they really died. Like, they're like dead and gone. This was not something I sat around and talked about with my friends at Harvard. No, you didn't, Arnie. We all expected to live and hoped to thrive. Not the narrative in every community. One of those neighborhood kids who walked through the center's doors that July was Calvin Williams. I'd known the Williams family for years. They lived less than a block away from Kenwood Ellis Church, where my mom's program was located. Like every kid in the neighborhood, Calvin was African American, but unlike most kids, his family was intact. He had 2 brothers, all of them lived at home with their mom and dad, both of whom toiled away at working class jobs. See, so these are basically poor black people. Most families in North Kenwood were broken and scattered without fathers or with siblings divided among aunts and uncles, grandmothers, and grandfathers. Drugs, bruh. Not the Williamses, though. They were seemingly immune to the violence and gang activity that hung over the neighborhood like a cloud, darkening everything that happened on the streets and in their homes. This cloud even hung over my mom's program. Once, in 1970, when I was only 5, the center was located in the shabby Woodlawn Mennonite church, but had to be relocated after the minister, Reverend Curtis Burrell, refused to allow a gang called the Blackstone Rangers use it as arsenal to store their guns. The punishment for that refusal was the Rangers firebombing the church, which thankfully they did at night when the building was empty of people. No one was hurt, but a lot of the teaching materials were damaged. The fire fatally compromised the building, and my mom was forced to move out with what she could salvage. One of my earliest memories was of shuttling boxes of books from Woodlawn over to Kenwood Ellis, where the center was still located in 1986. Years later, we were driving down a one-way alley a few blocks from the center to pick up one of her students. The car was full of kids, and like always, Sue was ambling along about 10 miles per hour. But on that day, someone jumped in front of us with an assault rifle and started shooting at someone in the car behind us. Wow. My mom jammed the brakes, threw our station wagon in reverse, and screamed out of the alley as fast as the car would go. Probably 35 or 40 miles an hour. Wow. Oh my god. No one was hurt that time either, but it was terrifying. I was definitely the fastest I'd ever saw her drive through the neighborhood. Like, head trauma. I don't know. Early that summer, I found myself sitting on the church steps waiting for Calvin. The church, a gray Romanesque fortress of a building, its high-peaked gable end facing Greenwood Ave, had stood watch over the neighborhood for over 100 years. Like any structure that manages to survive that long in an American city, Kenwood Ellis had witnessed a lot of change from the neighborhood's early days as a leafy enclave for wealthy Chicagoans to the neighborhood's current state as a mostly neglected black ghetto. White flight. Man. My family lived in a small house less than 2 miles away on the other side of 47th Street Divide in the racially mixed middle-class neighborhood of Hyde Park. I'd walked to the church that day, a stroll that took barely 30 minutes. Excuse me. It's a strange feature of cities, how quickly they can change from block to block. That's the truth. That's why they started naming all these neighborhoods, especially in Oakland. My goodness. My family was solidly middle class. It's not like I was living in some walled off community, but Calvin and I might as well lived on opposite ends of the state of Illinois. So this is like a few blocks away, totally separate neighborhoods. I specifically remember the heat that day as I caught sight of Calvin striding up 46th Street. I was in the shade, but it was humid and there was no breeze coming off the lake to the east. I waved at Calvin when he was about half a block away. He smiled and he waved back before breaking into a light jog. He looked happy. He looked eager. The Williams boys were good kids. They stayed out of trouble and in school. They didn't drink or smoke, and they got good grades. What are good grades at a poor neighborhood school? Ask any poor kid at Berkeley. They don't mean shit. You flunk out your first year. Like, getting good grades at an awful school means nothing. This is why, I don't know. I feel like maybe I take my own education for granted. I went to public schools, but I went to public schools in Berkeley, so I guess they were relatively good. But when I swapped to OSA, man, the Oakland School for the Arts, them niggas, they didn't have no kind of academia there. They didn't even have books. We didn't read. I didn't do homework for 2 years, and basically everybody at the school at that time was not academically gifted. People were coming from the bar was low. Let's just put it that way. Whatever. So, they got good grades. Blah, blah, blah. Maybe they get out of the South Side. Maybe they choose to stay. But whatever happened, all the signs indicated that the Williams boys had a better chance at succeeding than many of their peers. So basically, to be politically correct, these boys followed all the rules. It's just such a low fucking bar. I don't smoke or drink. All the rich kids at all the public schools smoke and drink a lot, so I'm not sure what that's saying. Anyway, he could play a lot better than I could. He was 17 in 1986, and he was easily twice the player I'd been at his age. He was long, lithe, and quick, and had a good shot and better instincts on both ends of the court. He was fun to play with and let his game talk for him. He was one of those players that made things easier for teammates and a hell of a lot harder for opponents. Okay, great. So he spends a whole bunch of time playing basketball. I know black kids always do this. He was one of those players who made things a lot easier for his teammates and a hell of a lot harder for opponents. I had 3 years of college ball under my belt, and it was obvious that Calvin's future college career had a lot more upside than mine ever had. He'd always been a good student, consistently making the B honor roll a few blocks away at Martin Luther King College Prep High School, where his Jaguars had gone 32-1 in '86 and won the Illinois State AA championship. Okay, side note, hood facts. All the failing neighborhood schools are always called Malcolm X or Martin Luther King, and the most violent streets in all the hood neighborhoods, it's always hella killings on Martin Luther King Boulevard, MLK Avenue. He was a non-violent proponent of protest, and all the violence happens on Martin Luther King Street. It's where the gangs set up. Bottom line, he was good enough for a rare field program at a Division I school. Yeah, he probably doesn't even know what that is. All we had to do was get him up to par on his test-taking skills so that he could get a decent score on the ACT. Good luck with that. Hey, Arne, Calvin said, stopping at the bottom of the church steps. He was in the sun. I was in the shade. What's up? Nothing. Just trying to stay cool. You? Same, man. It's hotter, it's hotter than you know what out there. Who the fuck said that? Chicagoans love to complain about the temperature, no matter the season. Too hot in the summer, too cold in the rest of the year. Cry us a river. Have you thought about what we talked about last time I asked about where you want to go for college? Honestly, since school's out, it's all I think of, he said. The guidance counselor was saying I could aim for Kansas, Kentucky, Georgia Tech. Okay. I was thinking maybe Illinois too, just to stay close to home. I don't know where else, because maybe they were good last year. I think it might be colder there than here, I joked. Yeah, maybe. More snow, I think. That's what they say, anyhow. I stood and stretched out my arms. Um, where was I? Oh, crap. My t-shirt clinging to my back and shoulders. Snow was the furthest thing from my mind at that moment. You're good enough for any of those places. That's for sure. Good enough in basketball, sir. Your academics are shit. To be honest, I was jealous of Calvin. I wasn't thinking anything away from what I'd accomplished. I knew I was lucky to be playing for the Crimson, and I loved it, but I would have given up a lot for his level of talent. So here we've got the blackboard kid who's way more talented than the third-year player at Harvard. Put that into retrospect. I guess, man, but not good enough for Harvard, though, he said with a snicker. Are you kidding? You'd murder the entire Ivy League single-handed. They wouldn't be able to keep up. I spoke truth. There wasn't a player in the Ivies who could stay in front of him. Not on the break, not in the half court, not bursting off a pick and roll, no one. I'm not going to let you waste your time at a place like Harvard. I turned toward the church door. Come on, let's get started. The church didn't have air conditioning in those days, but the stone walls kept the inside a little cooler, especially in the early part of the summer. By the end of August, after it had cooked for a few months, it would be hotter, but for now it was comfortable. Calvin followed me up a rickety flight of stairs to the second floor. The classrooms were arranged by grade level, a couple of them subdivided into smaller learning areas. The room for little kids had tables and chairs that were low to the ground, a cushioned reading area with some matted stuffed animals, a place to draw and cut out shapes from donated magazines or construction paper, and a place to lay out colored blocks that Sue used to teach math concepts. The area for older kids, a couple doors down, was less kid-like. Okay, we don't give a shit about that. I'm trying to get to the part. So they have a lot of books. Books were piled everywhere. On the walls were posters of inspirational figures, people you'd expect: MLK, Mark Twain, Abraham Lincoln, Langston Hughes, Mahatma Gandhi, but also a few people who were local to the Kenwood Hyde Park area, like Muhammad Ali, Carol Moseley Braun, Edward H. Levy, and Muddy Waters. Muddy Waters, I know him. The message with this latter group was simple. Great people come from here. You can be great too. Calvin and I sat at a regular table with a pale linoleum top that was cool to the touch. I arrived a little earlier and had already put out materials. This was going to be our first time working together, so I needed to get an idea of where he needed the most help. This part gets me every time. Okay, I was going to give him what I'd call an assessment, but which back then I just called a reading packet. The packet replicated the English comprehension section of a standardized test like the ACT. There was a passage, a piece of fiction from an old book, or an article from a periodical, followed by some basic questions. Calvin would have to write out his answers, so I'd set out a couple of sharpened number 2 pencils and a short stack of loose leaf paper. I made sure he was comfortable, watched him read the passage, and asked the first question, and left him to write while I got us some ice water from the kitchen downstairs. When I came back, I set his glass on the table. I looked over his shoulder at his work. He'd answered about 5 questions already. He took a breath, looked up at me, smiling, and said, "Thanks for the water, man. I'm thirsty as hell." Hell is about as tame as they come. But this was one of the few times I'd heard Calvin swear, including on the court, where foul language blares constantly. He picked up his glass and drank all the water in 3 or 4 loud gulps. I didn't drink. Instead, I stood there, frozen solid, like the ice in my glass. I was shocked. I plainly saw that Calvin struggled to read and could barely form a proper sentence. His letters were fine, but his spelling was dismal. His ability to craft a cohesive thought using written language was non-existent. Shit. I wasn't an expert, but if I had to guess, Calvin Williams, a rising high school senior on the B honor roll, could read and write at a 2nd or 3rd grade level. You alright, man? He asked. Yeah, fine. I took a sip from my water, hoping the cold ice clinking on my teeth would jolt me out of it. Nah, bruh. This is like a hard jolt of reality. Calvin looked down at the page and then back up at me. Did I do something wrong? I sat next to him. Nah, nothing. I put my finger on the words he'd written out. Do you write much at school? He shrugged. Guess so. I got a B- in English at the end of the year. Passed the tests and all. What tests, sir? What tests are you passing at a 2nd grade level in high school? You're supposed to go to college. Like, he's not ready. He's not ready. And this is not him. It's all the kids. This is Black America. Now, it's 2020. Like, who's gonna say? Oh my God, it's a lot. Okay. I didn't know what to say. I knew automatically that, bearing some miracle, I would not be able to give Calvin 10 years of English instruction in 2 or 3 months. I knew in my heart, and as much as I wished it otherwise, that he had no chance of ever getting into a Division I school. He probably wouldn't score higher than 12 or 13 on his ACT. The absolute minimum for getting into college was 16, and that was still incredibly low. We have a lot of work to do, Calvin. This ain't good. Look, I'm not going to lie to you. If you want to go to Kansas or Syracuse or any of those other places, we've got to get down to work. And we'll have to work hard all summer long. He kind of chuckled. All right, no problem. That's why I'm here, ain't it? You know I'll put it in. I did know it. He was an easy kid, a joy. He worked hard at basketball, and he'd work hard here too. He wasn't lying, but I was. It hit me so hard. The odds of him living out his dreams were close to 0. Gosh, and why? He hadn't screwed up. He hadn't joined a gang or started drinking. He hadn't ended up in juvenile hall for some stupid teenage transgression. He hadn't become a teenage father. He was a model kid who'd done everything right. His talent for basketball would be all for nothing. Not because he had failed or his family had failed, but because the education system had failed. Calvin Williams wouldn't make it because of the lies that the Chicago school had told him and his parents about how much he'd learned and about how ready he was for college. The truth, though, was that he'd learned far too little and he wasn't ready. We did work hard that summer, sometimes 7 days a week. The more I learned about what he didn't know, the more depressing the whole exercise became. In math, Calvin had to begin with fractions, which was what 5th and 6th graders did. He knew almost nothing on the history section of the ACT. I remember him saying, I do good in history, but either that stuff isn't in our books or we skipped that section or something. He couldn't answer any questions that dealt with science. Also, he didn't know he was allowed to write in the test booklet. Really? Calvin thought part of the test was having to do all the math problems in his head. No! He was amazed when I told him he could work them out right there in the book. Through all of this, I didn't give up on him, but I also never had the courage to tell him straight up that he wouldn't be going to college, and I'm not proud of that. I've fallen out of touch with Calvin over the years. I'm not sure when it dawned on him that he wouldn't be going to some big time program, but if I had to guess, it was probably when his ACT scores came back later that year. My mom always liked to get the kids young. She knew she would change the life of a 5-year-old's, but that changing the life of older kids was a lot harder. Yeah. With Calvin, we were too late. If he'd come into the career center as an 8th grader, then he would have been fine, but not as an 11th grader. The hole was too deep, and the timeline was too short. Yes, he worked hard. Yes, he improved. Yes, we helped him. But it wasn't close enough. Oh, man. I could keep going with this. It's so bad. Okay, I'm gonna finish. So the chapter's almost done. It's just like 1 or 2 more pages. So, I mean, if you stayed this far, might as well hear out the rest of the chapter. This ain't good. He'd asked innocently that first day. This question haunted me for years, and in some ways it still does. The most insidious part of the whole thing was that he didn't know what he didn't know. He truly thought he was a B honor roll student. He was as certain about this as about the fact that he was a gifted athlete with a bright future. Perhaps worse still, the school and his teachers and his coaches also did not know that Calvin was so far behind. As far as they were concerned, he was an actual B student. If he'd been put into an academic test against a similar kid from my neighborhood, then his school would have assumed that Calvin would have done fine, but he wouldn't have. The lies being told are so ingrained that it had been told for so long they'd become invisible. The whole thing was so needlessly cruel. Here was a young black kid who represented the best of what we had on the South Side. And what did he get for being the best? Nothing. He had no chance in life. None. All because, unlike me, he came up on the wrong side of 47th Street. Those 10 blocks changed everything. I went back to Harvard that fall, finished up my undergrad studies. My senior thesis was all about kids like Calvin and about my mom's program, in which I had had the good fortune to grow up and learn, not just about what was in books, but about what was on the basketball court, about what was on the streets, and about what was in the people. My thesis was in part about the lie I'd been shamefully forced to tell Calvin Williams that hot summer afternoon. I ended up playing professional basketball for a few years after I graduated, although in Australia and not in the NBA. I did manage to get invited and cut from camp with the Celtics. I played for 2 years in Melbourne and another 2 in Tasmania, where I met my wife. Since returning from that faraway place, I've donated my life and career to helping kids. I've tried to make the American school education system better functioning and more honest. For me, this work has been all about closing that achievement gap between where I grew up and where Calvin grew up. It's been about trying to erase the 47th Street divide, about closing the distance between those 10 blocks. In America, there's no reason that a kid born in one place should not have the same chances and opportunities as a kid born in another. This work has not been easy. I've seen the lies challenged at many turns, but they survive, they persist. The lies told to Calvin were not told to torture him. They were not intended to make children's lives worse, or to demoralize parents, or to make America less competitive or less intelligent. They didn't exist with the purpose of turning poor kids into poor adults, but I mean, they kind of do. More often than not, they had nothing to do with protecting resources. Oh, I'm sorry. More often than not, they had to do with protecting resources or safeguarding jobs or controlling what kids were taught and how, or whether they were tested on what they knew. Nearly all of the lies had to do with money and where power is concentrated, not with education. This was the case then, and in many places, this is the case now. The big lies are the ones that the system tells to parents about how their kids are learning. The ones that schools tell to every level of government about how great their students are doing. In turn, these government offices tell families and students that their children are well prepared to grow up and graduate into an increasingly complex, technically challenging, and highly competitive world. This is bullshit. This is why China is winning. I see this as America's collapse. Like, if I were you, I would learn Mandarin and math because America's doomed. And literally, China just pulled 2 million people out of poverty in 10 years or something crazy like that. And they literally are training AI personal assistants to help these already kumoned up kids. Are you kidding me? Dude, Calvin's reading at a second grade level in 11th grade. More than 50% of the students in this country are Calvin. They're not all black, but the Latino students are sucking too. So, dude, we're not doing well. So for the 5 AI researchers out there, especially with the immigration ban, we're fucked. It's not. Learn Mandarin and math. That would be the best advice. So the truth is that compared to students in other countries, our kids are not prepared. That's true. These are the lies that create students like Calvin Williams. Are we coming up short everywhere? No, I'm not throwing the entire system under the school bus. I mean, I am. Because we can't compete internationally. We just kind of suck. Whatever. Despite the issue of gun violence, schools are safe havens. Despite gun violence is fucking huge. Kids are getting shot up. Despite the issue of gun violence, schools are safe havens, and there are countless K through 12 public schools in this country in every single state where great leaders and teachers buck trends and where resources are concentrated laser-like on doing right by students. Yeah, this only upholds in wealthy upper middle class neighborhoods that are predominantly white. So, that's not most places. Some states like Massachusetts and Tennessee have made hard decisions that have paid tremendous dividends for the students of their states. But the existence of these schools and statewide initiatives does not exonerate those other schools or states that are not up to par, nor does their existence help with the problems of perception. Time and time again, I've seen how schools suffer from something I like to call the Congress polling problem. This is the phenomenon that results when voters are asked to rate Congress, which they invariably grade poorly, and are then asked to rate their own congressperson, whom they rate as satisfactory or higher. The same thing happens when Americans are polled about schools. Oh, the nation's schools are in big trouble, but ours are pretty good. If the latter were true everywhere, then how could the former also be true? Yeah, it can't. This is the definition of cognitive dissonance, and it is harming the country as a whole. Yes, it is. The good schools in this country have managed to defeat the lies that undermine our system so much that they've been able to circumvent them. Poorer schools that fail at the bedrock mission of educating students are not so lucky. This is true across the United States. I've already told you the story about how, at least in 1986, it was true in Chicago. But if the story of Calvin Williams was the most poignant in spurring me toward a life in education, then the story of John Easton and his damning PowerPoint presentation was the most alarming. It wouldn't happen for many years to come, but it compels me to push ahead and eventually to try to upend the system entirely. Okay, yeah, I gotta come back for a part 2 and break this down. But damn, Kelvin, these schools are broken. Ugh.